So welcome to all of you. And today we are going to have a talk from Professor John Porter on research of ethics of research. It's a very important topic for all students as well as PhD and MSc students as well as researchers from our organization. So we thought that to make use of Professor John Porter visiting TDU, so we thought to make this arrangement. So we're going to talk next 45 minutes on the ethics, which is very important component of research. So just to introduce John Porter, Dr. John Porter is from London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. He's a professor of international health. So he's having a medical background and he has a quite long experience in the field of tropical medicine, tropical disease, and infectious disease and public health research, health system research. So a very wide range of experience he is having. And he also worked on extensively on specifically infectious diseases like tuberculosis, leprosy, HIV. So, and also he is an expert in applying various aspects of mixed method research, like quantitative and qualitative research. So we request him to start the talk on ethics of research. So thank you very much for accepting our invitation, Dr. Porter. So over to you. Please start your talk.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Very nice to see everybody. As I think happens more and more, we are controlled by technology. So I'm a little bit concerned here because the technology doesn't seem to be working. So I'd planned to do something and suddenly I didn't have any slides. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do, which I think is quite a good way to start talking about the ethics of research. So my interest in ethics goes back really to when I was a medical student, and certainly as a young doctor working in hospitals and seeing things that were happening that just didn't feel quite right. So this kind of tension, that dissonance that in a sense we have as individuals when we come across particular situations, I'm presuming that most of you have that as well. That sort of just something isn't quite right here. And maybe senior people are telling me, no, this is fine, but actually my gut is saying something kind of rather different. That to me, in a sense, is the core of when I'm talking about the ethics of research. It's something about making sure that each of us engages with this in the processes around what research is. And then certainly when I'm talking to graduate students and doctoral students at school, this issue around the research you're doing and how you've decided that this is important research and worth doing. And secondly, if you are working with a population of people, what does that mean in terms of your responsibilities to each of those individuals, both at the time of your study and potentially long term? So the more I've kind of worked on this, the more it's like you can't get away from ethics at the end of the day, but you also can't get away from yourself as an individual and your responsibilities to all these other people that you're working with. So I think there may be some slides available now. Right. So I can control.
Yes, once.
All right. So just to say also, my interest in ethics goes back a long way. And I used to be, for a number of years, I was the chair of the Research Ethics Committee at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. So I've seen ethics also from the point of view of research committees. And I'll talk a little bit about that process at the end. But this issue of the individual, how we relate to others, and then how we move into communities and groups. So in a sense, those very simple steps for me are key in the whole way I kind of look into the broad thing of ethics. And ethics to me is something about complete integration at the end of the day of myself with other things. So this thing of the dignity of the individual, what that means, respect for the other when I'm, say, relating to you, and then also being aware of the community of which I'm a part. So very simple steps, but really crucially important ones at the end of the day. So there we go. Right, so I thought I'd start with this slide to highlight a variety of different things. I like this slide for all sorts of reasons. It's one of the many slides I associate particularly with coming here also, and the things that I've learned from a different perspective, in a sense, around what this means compared to the culture that I come from. So I put down Tarja. I'm not going to say you know far more about this figure than I do. But maybe this is something to do around what we're talking about in terms of ethics and integration. And this is a picture to remind us, in a sense, of the broadness of what we're talking about in terms of health and healing. So, I don't come from that culture. I don't come from the culture that you come from. I come from a different one. And so you have to understand, and maybe excuse me, in a sense, for coming from a Western philosophical perspective, because that's how I've been trained. And currently also, in terms of international health, that is the dominant culture that is predominating. It's changing, and it will continue to change. And the other aspect of that is also that English is the predominant language. And that is one language, okay? But it's the power language in the sense. So that's the one we kind of work with. But in that process, there's a lot of issues around understanding of the words. And then certainly with European languages, for example, it's fascinating. If you take a word like dignity or respect, how it gets translated into other languages, and what is the texture and the feeling of that word the same in German compared to English, for example, or in Hindi compared to another language. So ethics is a part of philosophy, and it's very much around the meaning of words. And some people will say ethics is all about the meaning of words. So the difference between talking about Morning. Everyone talking about research ethics versus the ethics of research. So I'd just like to put that out. Is there any difference to you in terms of the terms research ethics versus the ethics of research?
Students, what do you mean?
So this is also a great place to start with ethics. Because it's like you throw out something, I throw out something, and then there's silence. And everyone kind of goes, we're going to go with that. And so is maybe no one will come in on that, but
Some people.
we need to. Those are the culprits. Thank you very much.
We just request all online participants to mute. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so unless anyone has any comment on that. Okay.
I don't think, I see it quite similar.
Okay, because in many senses it is, I'm just putting in an of in there. But for me personally, there's a difference, because there's something about research ethics for me is a term that's used, it's almost like jargon, everyone, but the ethics of research somehow starts to bring in a process for me. Okay, so the ethics of, what is that? So again, this thing of kind of texture in how we put together words and then language. So I want to also just mention science. And I think for me at TDU, there's a lot I learn also, particularly from the disciplinary perspective and what it means to be transdisciplinary, that's really important in how I look on science. And also this Western, what I call a Western perspective of science. What I get when I come here is that your perspective is much bigger. So there's something about the Western perspective of science which comes very much sort of post-Enlightenment in European history. For me, I'm finding I'm getting guided down rather than up. So when I start to work with broader issues, like, for example, putting Damantari right up at the start, that really helps me to kind of expand my particular perspective on science. But here's the definition of science: the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation, experimentation, and testing of theories against evidence. And there are 4 definitions of science: observation, identification, description, experimental investigation, and theoretical explanation of natural phenomena. But within science, there would be power structures in terms of disciplines that are more or less powerful at particular points in time. And that relates also to the cultural perspectives that we're operating in. So philosophy is simply not like science. It's much more intricately wrapped up in cultural legacies. So this what science is, and then what happens when we bring in philosophy and things like ethics, we open it up. So we open up, for me, the word science and what it means. And here are just examples. So thinking historically, if science is really all around collecting and analyzing information, could say that human beings have done that for thousands of years. At this point in time, we define it in a particular way, but here are 3 other perspectives that have come historically from other teachers over the last sort of 1,000 years. And at different points in time, those perspectives will be dominating, like particular cultural perspectives. And within the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine and the issue of what we call decolonizing our perspective, these sort of slides are becoming more and more important to help guide students to realize that we're looking at things in a very particular way, but historically, there are lots of other ways to look at these particular issues. But there's something about ethics which comes down to core for me, around individuals, how we operate together, as I've said, how we relate to others, and then how we relate to populations.
Prakash, you can just mute everybody else.
I've told
No, just you can just do that.
you can do. Just take this 1 second. So before I go on to, in a sense, the core part of my talk, I also wanted to put this up because this is again something that I've learned very much from the years of coming to India. And this thing of philosophy and epistemology, where knowledge comes from. And again, just thinking back to the definition of science and then how we decide that something is really true. And one of the things coming here has really helped me expand, in a sense, this perspective. So these are ways more from an Ayurveda philosophy perspective around ways of knowing, from direct perception, inference from prior knowledge, from the guru, people who speak the truth, and then intellect. This is not the culture I come from, but I've learned a lot from this culture, in a sense, of expanding how I see things. And for me, that's really important in terms of ethics, because it relates to the type of research I do and trying to make sure that that work is ethical. And if I go with my standard approach, for example, that I was taught in science, if I move to this perspective, it really challenges my whole ethical structure of how I operate. And I think that's really good from the point of view of learning, and certainly from the point of view of kind of getting to the essence of what ethics is about. Okay, so I'm going to go on now to just talk about where I'm coming from. So this is the Western philosophical perspective I'm coming from Socrates. Nothing can be taught, knowledge is discovery. And we're discussing no small matter, but how we ought to live. So ethics sits within that, how we ought to live.
we're doing research, we're working with other people, potentially we're using other people for our own benefit. Maybe we'll argue that that's fine because it's to do with the population. If it's to do with the population, that's a larger majority, and we'll work with that. We can sacrifice the individual for the benefit of the population, these sort of issues. And is this okay at the end of the day? You know, is this the sort of society that we want to live and operate on and do our research within? Oops. So, awareness, attention, intention, being conscious as individual researchers in what we're doing. Awareness, attention. And then what is your intention? What's my intention in the type of work that I'm doing in terms of my research structure and where I'm taking it? And then what does it mean ultimately to be conscious in that process? All research is rooted in social values. It's not neutral and value-free, as we're already saying in terms of culture. So we must consider the scientific methods and merits of our research, as well as its social and policy implications. And scientists have a primary obligation to doing good science and to advancing knowledge, but not at the expense of risking or doing harm. And this is a core part of ethics, of research. So this thing of what you do with the individual, and when is it okay to use the individual in a particular way, maybe for the benefit of the population? When is that actually okay? And we must consider what we can contribute whilst doing the right thing. So in terms of, let's say, international research ethics, this is the history. And it comes primarily post-Second World War, although, of course, it's always been there. You know, we go back to the Greeks, for example, and they did research and they had ethics and process as well. So in terms of, you could say, global ethics, this is where we start, post-Second World War, with the Nuremberg trials and establishing a medical research code around voluntary participation, informed consent, and justification of risk. And then ethical crises in research practices, particularly the Tuskegee syphilis study in the United States between 1932 and 1972, led to a whole process of the Belmont Report, and then the creation of the three principles. And then finally here, the Declaration of Helsinki, which is all around the individual. So does anyone know about this study, the Tuskegee syphilis study? What was that study about, and what the problem was? Okay. So you will have here, there will be studies like this, right, in your culture. So this is in the American culture, in a sense. This was research going on, and this was something that was discovered that was a problem.
You want to tell about the study?
Yeah, so you tell me.
No, you want to.
Why did you tell me? Yeah. Do you know what it is, Mesh? Do you know much about it?
I've got a little idea about it. It was a cohort study on observational study on syphilis, and it was mainly done in a Black population, and looking at the progression of syphilis disease in the population, and after many years, syphilis had a medicine, but the medicine was not given to the study population. Yes. Even though it was curable, they were just kept observing, and that created people who suffered with the disease along the unnecessary. So yeah, and that was ethical.
So
Also prisoners. Also prisoners, isn't it?
no, this one wasn't. That was other studies. Yes.
Yeah. The main ethical issue in this study is to participants were not informed about their condition as well as the treatment which is available at that moment.
So a combination of things. It's also what happens over a prolonged period where something is ethical originally and then gradually becomes ethical. So something about how we lose awareness and consciousness of what the process is. So in the 1920s, they wanted to find out more about the progression of syphilis. So this was a group of Black men in the southern United States, so from poor communities, and they were followed. And just the nature of bringing in a research team to follow them meant that you could say they were getting a bit more than they were getting before, because there was a whole group of people who were actually keeping an eye on them, whereas before they weren't. I mean, maybe they had basic medical facilities. So there was something about them, and they volunteered. I don't know about the informed consent process at that stage. And that was fine up to, as we said, this point where antibiotics came in, and it was possible then to treat. And they weren't treated. And that went on for a number of years. And then it was early in the 1970s where journalists picked this up, started to report it, and then this led to an enormous scandal and a big report coming out. It's not as straightforward as that. There are books on this, because also in terms of deciding whether it was okay to continue like this or not, you had this issue of people from very poor communities, and there was a concern that it was fine, you could give them antibiotics, but their whole social infrastructure, in a sense, was then dominated by this work. So they'd, in a sense, become identified with this whole work, and there was a whole social structure and care structure that was within it. Nevertheless, it led to the Belmont Report and to some of the things that I'm going to talk about here. So the core of what I'm going to talk about is what is ethics, a bit about research ethics from the perspective that I come from, how to make ethical decisions, and then about ethics committees. So I'm going to go backwards. I'm going to go backwards. Just go backwards. Let's go backwards one more. Okay. So what is ethics? So could somebody tell me? What does that word mean to you? And maybe as a researcher, what does ethics mean to you?
It's a code of conduct.
Okay, code of conduct would be one thing.
To ensure the population is not harmed.
Okay, so ensuring a process where people are not going to be harmed in your research, yes? Anyone else? Values, right?
Respect.
Respect, okay. So here are some. And you will all have your own favorites. So I've got Socrates in there, we've talked about. And I have this one around learning to live together. So it's like, for me, this is a theologian in the Second World War who worked on ethics. And this thing, it's a constant process. So for me, it's around consciousness and awareness, and also being aware that things are changing all the time. So like if you go back to the Tuskegee issue, something happened. People went to sleep, in a sense, around what was going on, and what was that all about? And it was a process that we needed to spend more time being aware of. Okay, so let's just put you guys on the spot for a bit. We're just going to play a game here, see where we go. Maybe you could work in little groups. So you're a party of 5 people potholing. Do you know what potholing is? So potholing is going underground into caves, right? So you've gone underground into caves because you like doing that sort of thing and seeing beautiful caverns and things. But then on your way out, the leader, who's rather fat, gets stuck. And there's no other way out other than through that. But your leader is stuck, preventing you from getting out. So the 4 of you are behind him, and you have sticks of dynamite. You sit down for a case conference. So what are you going to do? So let's just have a little conversation. What are you going to do? You make just little groups, and let's.
Just turn around and speak. What do you think we should do?
very assumptions and all that. Yeah, we can't watch the black and white. You stand by the roof of the cave, might come down and so either way, we all die. That's a fun thing.
Good for the something about you're being asked to act. Maybe you should act.
Neither forward nor back.
Yeah. So the classical style, is more information. So we'll see what happens. Like, so
this is also much broader ethics.
come back and yeah.
Can you loosen up, no?
Okay, so let's hear what some of the discussions, what's happened. What are you going to do? Anyone like to let me know what?
Vikrant has a very idea. I don't know the name, but you also get a very idea.
Yes, let's hear. You're happy to share?
Share your idea.
That's it. What are you going to do?
So we have two things. If if we can't put him out backside.
Yeah, you can't.
We can't.
No.
So we'll, if we have that thing that we can put dynamite on him. If four people will not like that. If there is a situation that four will live and only one person will die.
Right.
So
So
we
we
will
will
do that.
sacrifice one.
So you're going to do that?
We will sacrifice one.
Oh, really? Okay. So that's what you're going to do.
2-3 ideas.
You decided. That's right. That's one. Okay. Okay.
We can use the dynamite to create another way.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. So you're not quite, yes, that's right. You're kind of not quite playing the game that I want you to play here. Never using the dynamite in a slightly different way. Okay. So we got the sort of thing of, we were getting the idea. Anyone else got different perspectives on what are you going to do?
The leader is the one who's stuck, so I think it's the leader's call, first of all.
But you can't, but the leader's facing outwards. So you can't talk to the leader. No. So you just got his feet.
Possibly, will you try to push that leader out? And
Yeah, no luck, I'm afraid.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Is now
Okay.
this person will lose their water weight.
Yeah, okay.
No hasty decision.
But then I think the leader has also a mind, which is also, he can also try shouting for help. There will be other people who.
Hopefully, but you are way underground and, okay, that's great. So, how's that made you feel doing that exercise? So how are you feeling at the moment about, are you feeling okay? Are you quite happy?
So if
No, just, are you feeling quite happy with killing the leader?
So if four-
Just, are you, because that's what I heard you say, you're going to kind of blow this person up. How are you feeling about that? Okay.
So if four.
No, you're still not, I want to know. How are you feeling?
I am feeling bad, but if I am saving more lives,
Okay,
so I am
All right.
happy to be.
so one way, tell me if this is right, one way of making you feel better is that you believe you'll be helping other people.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
We had.
Isn't that an important aspect of research?
No, I don't think like that, because if I will not do anything, all will be dead.
Okay, right, okay. So I think what we can experience here is also what we feel and that what we think. And then how we kind of working those sort of two bits of ourselves together. Yes.
Yeah. We've had one more discussion. If they have equipments to get into the cave, why should we use the dynamite? They will have other things to.
So you're hoping people will come looking for you.
Yeah, no,
Right.
the tools.
They have tools.
They might have tools.
Oh, maybe you have tools,
So
right?
that was
Okay.
one. They might have tools to widen the
Okay.
cave and
Yeah.
so that is one.
Right.
Else to create a parallel way
Okay.
so that that can be done what they have mentioned already.
Very good.
Yes.
So what you're really getting, there are two approaches here, aren't there? There's one around, okay, well, we use the dynamite, we blow the leader up because of this one person versus four, and the other one, which is no, we don't do that. We preserve that, and then we kind of work in other ways that we hope might happen. So it's around, well, something might happen. Maybe something will come and rescue us in a sense. But this is what this makes us feel like, to me, which is, I hope it's all right, putting you on the spot about what that kind of is like. It's really uncomfortable. So this dissonance within ethics is really an important part of how we operate. So here is a perspective, in a sense, of getting into this sort of dichotomy between the subjectivist and the realist approach. Subjectivists to make a moral statement is to express an opinion or a taste which is neither right nor wrong. That's the subjectivist. Whereas the realist would say there are facts about the matter when it comes to morality. Some things are right and others are wrong. So let's just have hands. Who are the subjectivists here in the room? So who feel more in tune with that first one versus the second one? Who's a subjectivist?
I believe I'm more situational. It depends. I think of a subjectivist stance in a particular situation and realist.
So you're more the subjectivist, are you?
I think I'm more situational.
More, okay, so you're changing words. It's very interesting. Watch how we change words then in order, you're quite right. So I'll change the words in order to make me feel better and feel more connected to what I want to say. Yeah, important. Thank you. Anyone else? Any realists in here?
I think I'm more on the realistic side.
Okay. So there are just facts about things. Some things are definitely right and some are wrong. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I naturally take that unless I step back and think about it.
Okay.
My natural inclination is to
Very good.
go ahead with the realistic.
And we tend to find in a group of people there are both more, people feel more comfortable over here than this other one. So again, around this issue of the individual, the other, and then the community. This is around our community. And then we're individuals within the community and we're working with these different perspectives. Definition of ethics contained within the delicious tension between uncertainty or the state of decision-making in a probabilistic environment and the periodic duty to act. So Jung talked about ethics was about actions. So it's about this thing, we need to act. And then like in the cave, you're asked to act. And then, oh, what does that feel like? How are these bits of myself coming together and this sort of tension? So when we're under tension like that, there's something about ethics. So when stuff is coming out where you just don't feel okay, it's something to do with ethics.
I want to question the word delicious. Why would you use the word delicious? I mean,
Wow.
it's not, it's very uncomfortable.
Oh, right. So you don't well, so is tension a delicious thing for you or not? No. Okay. Right, there we go. So another thing around interpretation and how words affect us and what it means. So I hear you, but I also there is a delicious tension about it as well. So ethics going when we think, when we say, what we feel, and what we do are all going in the same direction. So what do you think about that?
You don't.
It's already done.
So what do you think?
Participants to unmute must.
No, don't give them wrong.
So this is again this thing of action. So think you're going to act, and what you're thinking, saying, feeling, and doing are all going in the same direction. How often does that happen?
No, I don't think it happens at all.
Oh, really? So why not? So talking from your
This delicious tension.
okay, right, delicious tension. So it's like, yeah, and I'm maybe put in a situation in a sense. Maybe my team, maybe I'm the primary investigator, but my team is telling me something that I'm wrong.
Yes.
And so I'm thinking something, they're thinking something else, I'm feeling something, and so we're going into different directions. So this is fine. I like it. And maybe it happens sometimes, but maybe this is something that I need to be trying to find. And if I do find it, then maybe it's easier for me in the sense that this action is okay because this all seems to be coming up together. And then these different tensions, again, between our role as individuals, professional bodies, society, and what that feels like. So this all again back to how we operate as individuals and the particular stresses and structures around us. So in terms of Western bioethics, there are stages that we've gone through to 2000, where talking about bioethics, population health and global health. But prior to that, a lot of ethics was really around conduct, and it was more around medical ethics. So it was in the medical structures, health structures, how were people expected to behave? And then it moved more into a dialogue between the professionals and the society. You brought in issues around confidentiality and so on. And then by stage 3, we were working in health sector reform and health policy, and now we're in the global health area. All guidelines in international ethics relate back to the Nuremberg Code, the Declaration of Helsinki, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There's another organization called the Council of the International Organization of Medical Sciences, which sits alongside the World Health Organization, but is a separate body. And they also have a responsibility for looking at research ethics, and did a lot of work, particularly in the 90s, around research in high, middle, and low-income countries, particularly bringing in, at that stage, talked about developing countries, issues that were being brought to the attention of researchers because they were working in different countries.
What's the most recent, I was going to ask, what's the most recent?
Right, so the Declaration of Helsinki. So this is a declaration that is profoundly important in terms of informed consent. Come back to that, and that gets updated. You could say the words within it get changed periodically. And what you find now in different countries, the Declaration of Helsinki will be a key one, but there will be other codes, ethical codes of conduct and also research ethics in different countries. So you go online and different countries will be using things, but the Declaration of Helsinki is a core one that we work with.
Can I have a question here?
Yeah.
So that example of what the exercise we have done, and hypothetically, if that opening was blocked by a big animal.
Sorry, start again. I didn't hear.
Now we took the example like the leader was stuck there.
Oh yeah, okay.
Instead of the leader, if it was blocked by a big animal, for example.
Okay.
Will our thinking change?
It's likely to.
Okay. Well, really, yeah, important point in terms of, again, this thing of, as I'm saying, this thing of the perspective that you're working with. I talk about cultural perspectives, but then in terms of, say, more of an Ayurveda perspective, a bigger perspective, this thing of where does the human fit? Where does the plant fit? Where does the animal fit in terms of the ethics of research? So let's come back to that if it comes up again. But just as you said, I'm hearing you change the human for an animal. What does that do? Does that mean it's easier, for example, to blow up the animal than it is for the human? Is an important ethics question.
You have to change the game into if that leader who stuck there is your father,
yeah,
or your mother.
Yeah.
You take the same decision,
Yeah.
So then you play. So you can change the game into different.
So this is all just to put you under more and more tension. It's more uncomfortable, then more trying to find your way through these different bits.
No, it's not just, they're just exploring how your feelings will change if you make the
In my case, if I am there stuck in that hole,
Yeah.
those people, poor people, doesn't have to listen to me because I am the victim there or something like that. So they have to take a decision by themselves, not.
Yeah, you are there and your father is stuck.
Yes.
Are you going to blow him up?
So it's a conflict of interest with
Yeah,
me. So
that's what we're talking
they have to separate me out of their conversation. They have to take decision. 3 of them have to take decision, not me, considering me. I think like that.
Yeah, and also you're the leader. So there was this thing, bit like, all these different roles we play, and then the responsibility of the leader. And maybe the leader, in your case, feels it's fine to sacrifice himself for the benefit of the others, because that's what he believes that the leader would do. In this state, we're talking, I think it might this a man, this could equally well be a woman. So we're talking here that this is an animal. So all of these things are driving us towards trying to get to the essence of what these things are about. So we'll come on to that in a minute. So within the Declaration of Helsinki, here are the basic principles, and there are 5 subsections, one around fundamental requirements for the conduct of biomedical research involving human subjects. So the focus here is human subjects. It's not around animal ethics. That's would be another committee, in a sense, working on animal ethics. Scientific and ethical review of research protocols, informed consent, selection of research subjects, and then responsibilities of physicians and other health research investigators, and then data management and publication of results. So it's this whole process of when you go from the beginning of deciding on what your research is about, going through your committee, conducting your research, and then coming to the end, then your data management and your research publications, and then your responsibilities, what you do with that research information, how do you feed it back? Do you go back to the communities that you've been working with? Is it sufficient to publish in a journal? So all of that is contained within the Helsinki Declaration. And then within SIOMS, again, I said 1990s, around more of a low-income country perspective, issues of informed consent, equity, priority, consent and review, and issues of externally sponsored research. So a lot of what this highlighted were the power dynamics, in a sense, between countries. And if you were coming from, say, a high-income country and you were going to a low-income country, what was going on in the type of research that you were involved in? An example, for example, if in terms of studies that were going on around malaria at that time that was sponsored from high-income countries. The work was done in low-income countries, and maybe it was successful, and then there was a drug created, but that drug was only affordable to those people from high-income countries and not from the country where the work was actually done. So those were the sort of issues that were coming up at that time. And then from the Belmont Report, which you remember came as a result of the Tuskegee, there were 4 principles that were created, themes in terms of bioethics and research ethics: respect for autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice. So this is again around the individual, respect for autonomy, beneficence and non-maleficence, meaning doing good and not doing any harm. That's all in how we're relating. And then justice, in a sense, is around the community, the balancing. So that would go back to the individual versus the population and how that operates. So any comments on those? Because these principles sit really at the core of international research ethics. And the words are not straightforward. And again, if you translate into other languages, they may mean things slightly differently. But in terms of ethics issues, if you come across ethics issues, this is one of the toolkits, in a sense, we have to work with. So anyone make any comments around those principles? What is autonomy, for example?
Respecting individual choice.
Okay. So this issue of respecting an individual's choice.
But I can see how that can become a little ambiguous if, for example, the human participant is a young child.
Right.
Who's unable to make that, not sensitive to make that decision for themselves.
Right. So this issue again around what autonomy is, and then in societies, who is autonomous and who's not, children, issues around mental health, for example, and capacity. So there are a lot of issues around what that is. And we certainly say in the West that we've become too individualistic, and we've lost this feeling of connection to others and connection to community, and that we need more of that in the West. So balancing where this individual autonomy has come with all these other aspects of doing good, and then justice, bringing in the population, the community side of things, the balance in a sense. So that would be around sacrificing the individual for the benefit of the population, for example, in the justice one. And that's, could say in our society, that's okay. But in other societies, maybe it's not. So what makes an action? Again, this thing, we're forced to act. That's what makes it really difficult, whether it's delicious or not, you know, that depends on you. But I mean, it's uncomfortable. Needs to be firmly based on rationality and logic. In a morally pluralist society where competing moral claims are supported by competing ethical theories, there's a need to systematically understand and balance rival positions to come to reasonable conclusions. What do you think about that?
This makes complete sense to me.
Okay.
So,
Because you're a rationalist, are you?
well, because I take the example of abortion, and I know that different religions have different take on it as a subject.
Right.
And so I can completely see this, that in a pluralistic society, when you have competing claims, and they're all moral in their own.
Okay.
Approaches. And especially in India, I think, because we are pluralistic as far as beliefs.
So how much, so what I'm hearing very much is the rationality aspect of it. So just to kind of give how much does the feeling stuff come in? How important is that in terms of rationality? Do you think that's contained within your rationality, how you feel? Or is it a very kind of more objective perspective?
I think it's completely entwined.
Okay. All right.
So,
all right.
I want to remove it, but I can't.
All right. So this is, again, goes back to the meaning of the word rationality and the textures within it. But for some people, the rationality is not about the feeling side. It's really about, and this is clear, this stuff really kind of messes things up. So this is moving more towards that we have kind of clarity in that rationality process. So the three themes that I'm going to talk about here, these are a bit like I put the principles up. So if these are tools in a sense for dealing with these issues: goal-based approach, duty-based approach, and a rights-based approach. So the action is good if the goal is good. The duty-based action, it asks if an action accords with certain principles, and then the rights stresses individual freedoms and claims protected in a given society by rights. So this one, an action is good if the goal or the outcome is good. This is considered what we call in Western ethics is around a utilitarian philosophy. The end justifies the means. And examples in terms of our processes, it would be around scientific validity. Is the research necessary and important? And will the studies answer the question being asked? So that's the goal-based approach. Anyone got any comments on that? It's okay. All right.
And justified means is problematic.
Whose goal, the researcher goal, the funding organization's goal?
Yeah.
All of this. And that's your responsibility because you're the PI on your study. Yeah. Hope that's make you more uncomfortable. So the things of so all those important questions that I need to be asking myself if I'm taking this role as a PI because of my responsibilities to all the group I met. It's that.
And again, the word good is also there. What is good? Good. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So in the utilitarian philosophy, so I'll just put that up.
Even their goal and outcome should be ethical.
Okay.
Then, but it's a.
Going back, right. So the end justifies the means.
Some bitter medicine cures a problem of a child. Bitter, the child is not able to take, but it is good for that child. Okay, so I'm just giving very simple.
Yeah. And then the
So, but
pet.
the outcome or goal is to cure.
I don't think it can be as simple as
Simple as
that. Because the discussion probably starts with ethics. I want to.
So in your philosophical background, you will have your equivalent to this. This is again the Western, and it comes from utilitarian. It comes from people like John Stuart Mill. Actions, rules, and right that produce the most utility, or at least as much utility as possible. So this is all around things like happiness and so on. There's a lot of big philosophy in here, but it is in public health terms, it's also this balance between the individual population, and in terms of public health, the population overrides the individual. Yeah. So we would sacrifice, although we don't like that term, an individual for the benefits of the population. And we do that in trials, for example, of drugs, where maybe there's certain side effects. Some people, yeah, but nevertheless, overall, this is for the benefit of everybody. So this is the philosophy that we're sitting in around that perspective. The duty-based one in Western ethics relates particularly to Kant, who is a very famous German philosopher. Does an action accord with certain principles like lying or cheating? And if so, it's wrong. And examples, welfare of research subject, what will participating in the research involve, and are the risks necessary and justifiable? And here is Kant, equal respect for all human beings. So a lot of this thing around what respect is, universal principle, and action is right if you can consent to everyone adopting the moral rule presupposed by the action, and the means ends principle. Those actions are right if that treat human beings, whether and so it moves this into rationality as well. How conscious as I am. And then if I become more conscious, maybe I then don't do it, or maybe I still do it, but I justified it in a particular way. So that's the sort of thing that comes into the duty phase. And then the third one is around rights, stressing an individual's claim protected in society by rights. This much more moves into international law, and again, post-Second World War and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This is Eleanor Roosevelt looking at the Universal Declaration of Rights. So goal-based, duty-based, rights-based. Let's just look at consent, because this is such a key part of how you relate to the individual in your studies. And your informed intentionality, comprehensibility, and coercion. So what is this process like in terms of how do you get consent from people? How do you really know that that consent is informed?
Information sheet.
Participant
Information sheet.
Okay, so to give them information, so you can have a participant information sheet, which gives them more information in a sense, so highlights before you're going to take the consent. Okay, what else might you work with? So
Ask them if they have any questions regarding the information that has been provided to them.
Right. So in terms of you're providing information, maybe there's a discussion. So in terms of what is this information and is it true? Because they're going to have to trust you at the end of the day. Okay. Well, what about verbal versus written consent?
That's very tricky, because you're assuming then that in a verbal consent, in a written consent, that the person understands what you have written exactly the way you intended for it to be understood.
Right.
And so in societies where the written word is not as seriously taken as a contract, it is problematic.
But
And
it's
even
what if you have a
verbal should also be,
So combination should be
its combination should be there.
verbal and written kind of a.
Whatever is, yeah, that's why we did know, whatever is, it should be read in front of them. It should be made, we should make the participant to understand whatever is written in their vernacular language. So, but there is a nagging doubt I have when we do consent, right? Like in our society, many decisions are taken as a family unit or a community unit, right? So even if I'm saying that individually somebody has signed on a piece of paper, it's not clear to me that they're doing it, because my sister signed up for it. And then in that case, I don't feel it is actually truly consent. It's just, it's actually coerced in a sense, but neither that person recognizes it and neither do I as an investigator recognize.
So this is really important and really difficult. And coming back to our kind of tension, for you as the PI, this is crucial. And also you'll be in a situation, maybe if you're working with a big cohort of people, where you're not actually getting the consent. Maybe you've trained other people to get it in a different language, whatever. How are you going to really trust both your co-workers and what that process is? Really challenging and so important at the end of the day. And all these other issues around, groups, power, communities, and what people understand. And then also if you actually write something down for people. So increasing also the legal obligations within, and then the more the legal obligations move in, often it becomes much more like a rote process. I would say it loses potentially the consciousness within it, because it becomes a legal thing and we just sign it. And oh no, we just do this. So consent then just becomes a thing rather than a whole dynamic process of how you're relating to your research subjects and perhaps the cohort that you're working with. So we could go on and on around consent, but it's such an incredibly important part of the tension between the individual and population and so on. So the template, the goal-based, duty-based, rights-based, is really around the validity of the research, welfare of the subjects, and the dignity of the research subject. So it's a tool. So the principles is one way of looking at it: autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice. So if you have a problem, use that. All right, start with that, and then go on to using this template as a way of helping you through. Consider the moral problems that the proposed research poses. Use the assessment template to help. Describe how the moral issues will be addressed, and think about moral relativism, especially with transcultural research. May come back to that in a little bit. I realize I've done way over my 45 minutes, so I'm going to
Can you go back to the assessment template slide for 1 minute, please?
Go back one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great, thanks.
Okay. I'm going to skip this. This is just ethical decision making. If you go online, you can find this is, and I'm going to move on to the issues around ethics committees. So in a sense, we've gone from the individual population, and now we're looking at these processes that in the West came very much from Tuskegee, and part of the Belmont Report was that we need to have ethics review of all ethics studies. And that used to be early on, it was sort of very focused on medical studies and drugs and social science research in the United Kingdom, for example, didn't come online until about 2000. So prior to that. So again, we're looking at what happens in a society over time, and then what's considered not necessarily initially, but then is included. So the humanities increasingly coming in. So one way you could look at that is more around thinking rationality versus the feeling, and then how they come together. So the role of the ethics committee to facilitate ethically acceptable attempts to identify new and better treatments from which we all may potentially benefit, protect research subjects and patients from exposure to unethical risk or invasion of privacy. And for me, this second part is just so crucially important. to review proposals to ensure research investigation conform to certain standards. And again, those standards are international standards, but there will be country-specific standards as well. And depending on the type of committee where you sit, maybe this is a university committee, maybe it's a research council committee, maybe it's a national committee. Again, there are different places for these research ethics committees. When they were established in the UK in the early 90s, the constituents, I think this is at the Royal College of Physicians, were one medical practitioner, nurse, with at least 2 lay members. What do you think the importance of the lay member is on your ethics committee? Do you understand the word lay?
Yes.
The lay member, so somebody who's not related to, what do you think is the importance of that person on your committee?
Very important. Very important. The cultural values. Yeah, they will bring a non-scientific.
All right.
Acceptance. They will have very. They will have cultural acceptance, scientific acceptance, without even knowing. Like we may be thinking of technical issues, but they view it in a broader sense. So that's very important.
So you could say bringing the community also, you could say
Yes,
into, and the scale, maybe they've, they're not trained in this particular way, whereas you could say other people on the committee have a particular expertise, so they're educated into that. And then the lay member comes in and provides that. They have to be pretty courageous, certainly on the committees that I've sat on, because, if you're working with academics or doctors and, it's like, whoa. It's quite hard, but there have been times, certainly in the committees I've worked in, where the lay members often we've been discussing something, we decided something, and then the lay member puts their hand up and says, I know this is very stupid, and then I know I don't understand really, but what about this? And then there's sort of silence. Oh my goodness, how did we miss that? So they are very important parts of the process. Research is a means to solving health problems, not an end in itself. So this thing of means and ends and using people as means to an end, it's all a key part of the tension here. The goal must be to create interventions that will benefit the people and the countries in which the research is conducted. They benefit only if the knowledge gained produces interventions that are affordable and accessible. So this statement from the Hastings Center, which was a big ethics center in the United States, came about, as you can probably detect, from that particular point in time where this wasn't happening. So like I used that example of malaria studies, where people from high-income countries, in a sense, were going to low-income countries and doing the work because they couldn't do it in their country for a variety of reasons. Maybe because the disease wasn't there, but their travelers would get it. So, the end up was that the drug was affordable for travelers, but nobody else. And in HIV, of course, this was huge in the 90s. And in terms of research ethics, lots and lots of work happened at that particular time. Externally sponsored review through ethics committees in both countries. So at the London School, if we've got doctoral students who are working in several different countries or not in the UK, for example, the process has to go through the committee in the UK and also the committee in the country that they're working in. Which committee is most important, would you say? The committee in the country that you're living in or the country where you're actually doing your work?
Doing the work.
Yeah?
Where we are doing the work.
So which one is more important? Which committee would you say is more important? The one in country?
One in the country.
Whichever committee holds you to a higher standard.
Okay. Yeah. So there's another perspective. Maybe, maybe you're, for whatever reason, maybe in this particular, the committees might be a little bit more corrupt, whatever that means, in terms of what we're talking about, the purity of the process. So straightforward and yet not straightforward. And it'll depend in your situation also, and you'll have to decide. But there will also be a structure. And on the whole now, it's certainly in the London School, it's the committee in country that is the most important. To the extent that I heard that there's a university in the UK which has just now decided it doesn't, if it's been accepted in that country, it doesn't need to go through the committee in the UK. And other universities going, oh no, we don't like that for a variety of those sort of reasons. So the play between the two is probably really important in keeping things clear. So, like the juggler, this is the ethics role of the ethics committee. Like the juggler, we must do our best to keep as many balls in the air by improving our juggling skills. So the definite one way of looking at ethics committees is muddling through elegantly. Right. So go back. No, back. Sorry, but this is, I'm not going to talk about this. You'll be pleased to know I finished. So just go back one. Yeah, that's great. So I hope this has been kind of useful for you as researchers. I think even if I've just got across this issue around the tension, whether it's delicious or not, I think is for me such a core part of what it means to be a researcher, and then also to be consciously engaging with all these really complicated issues, and maybe also situations where I'm told one thing, but it doesn't feel okay. And then, you know, if I'm more of a junior person within a team, do I stand up and say something, a bit more like the lay member? So this thing around our courage in these situations, if it doesn't, so I really encourage you, if it doesn't feel right, say something, yeah? Because there's probably something going on there that's really important. So do say something, and you know, that will help people in your study, the most vulnerable in your study, to make sure that they get a decent, in a sense, balanced approach to the research. Great. So,
Thanks. That was lovely.
Well, my pleasure. So, anyone got any questions or comments?
Is anyone on the ethics committee at TDU?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, you're on it, eh? Very good. So are you, what kind of role do you play?
I'm a member secretary of this committee.
Very good. So that's also interesting. You sort of, and you have a role. So it's like I was the chair. So you're there as your individual ethics person, but you also then have a role. So this is the chair also, or the secretary. You have these other, and they're also potentially conflicting at times.
Yes.
And that's uncomfortable, but good ethics is what I say. And, yeah. Great. Well,
Questions from anyone? Yeah. We have a lay person who is very strong.
oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, maybe a bit too strong, or
Yeah,
you would say that. Yeah,
So we'll just ask on the online if anyone wants to have offline first, we'll go if they have any questions. Otherwise, we'll just open for offline also. I'll just stop sharing and unmute all. Yeah, unmute all. Yeah, correct. Yeah.
No, they
They can unmute themselves. Okay.
you can just.
If any participants, if they want to unmute themselves and talk, I mean, if any questions, can go ahead.
Does Udni have a comment?
Yeah. Dr. One is there? Are you there? Yeah.
Hi, Professor John. Thank you so much for this very interesting discussion. I think I was just wondering, we heard a lot of classical dichotomy here, like means against end, awareness versus external systems and processes, relativists versus rationalists, and so on. I mean, it's very, very difficult to elegantly internalize this, as we're always juggling with these terms. I'm just wondering how, you started with a lot of other ways of looking at these perspectives. You started with the introduction of Chinese and the Indian understanding and so on. So do you think in the recent developments, any of these the pluralistic and cultural dimensions, and I think there was another point when you you showed those four aspects of autonomy and all that. You mentioned that it's individualistic as against and several other cultures, which is about community justice and community values around and so on. Do you think in the recent past, in the discussions on bioethics, the multiple cultural perspectives, multiple evidence base in that direction, is there any movement?
I would like
I'm asking, if I may extend my question, because I'm just, this is from the understanding that in multilateral processes, in the recent past, there's a lot of discussion, especially if you look at IPCC, Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services.
Yeah.
The more environmental, natural sciences, those areas, there's a lot of inclusion that is happening, evidence from multiple sources of knowledge systems. But I don't know how much of it, definitely in the WHO and related discussions, how much of it is being integrated. I'm not sure. So.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important question. And clearly I can only give my perspective on it. I would like to say that there's much more understanding in a sense. But when at the London School, if I just consider the subjectivist realist or the objective subjective side of things, it's like it's still very divided between what you sit on the objective side versus the subjective side. And I think it's fascinating, and also why, for me, one of the reasons that TDO is so important and it's been so important to me is this thing of when you bring together these different disciplines. So you've been educated in a particular way of looking at things, but there's always something underneath it. There's a philosophy that holds it. So kind of always digging deeper, and maybe I sit more in this, in a subjective science, maybe I'm more a social science than the objective, where I'm lab-based. But what I found is it seems to be remarkably difficult to bring those two different perspectives together. To a certain extent, I'd be expecting the subjective side to include the objective, because it's my training is in medicine, so it should be both objective and subjective, but was in a sense was very objective science. So also this issue of the body as an object. And in fact, the training I'm doing at the moment in something called biodynamic craniosacral therapy, what they ask in that particular tradition is about what is it that animates this? Yeah. So I can know all about this, but what is it that actually animates it? And then you're getting into questions around breath, and it's a completely different way from the way I was trained, but I'm finding it fascinating in terms of how it brings in these other perspectives. So I think at the London School, certainly some of the work that Mahesh and I have been trying to do, bringing in, we're calling it, so this word indigenous is also a really challenging word, in more indigenous health perspectives into work at the London School. It's remarkably difficult. When I did work back in 2000s and so with colleagues there, it's still just not, it's not there. It's still, for all sorts of particular reasons. And yet for me, it's a whole integrating process, and it's a philosophy that goes underneath things. So in answer to your question, I think, unfortunately, in my own career, and for me, these have been important issues from the 90s, it hasn't really improved, I think, is what I would say from my point of view. But I'm hopeful. And I think, again, with the impending climate crisis and so on, and again, another reason why the work you do here is so important. How to engage with all these, and your question, for example, about the animals, how to almost put people off guard, going back to what we were doing early on, and then introduce something that they hadn't thought of before, and then, oh, maybe this is interesting. So consciousness raising around it. But I would like to feel that there was more, and I kind of look to TDU also for guidance in that, because I think, you know, this is sort of work that you do.
What's the, I mean, you know, if ethics committees take unethical decision, what's the consequence for them if it's not anything, constrained? So this is a big question about whether the punishment actually constrains action. So there's lots of views about that, but that's the other thing, that people can be on ethics committees and still take unethical decisions. So what happens then?
Yes, and then you get back into institutions and governance structures within institutions and who checks on. And of course, now with computers and so on, we can do more and more of this, and we can tick boxes and so on. But is it a bit like going back to the informed consent? You can tick something, but if you really start to be consciously aware and feeling in this, difficult. Certainly, at the London School, there's there are more issues around the governance structures, and there's now a research governance committee that deals with a lot of broad governance issues within the institution, but the ethics committee processes would come under that, and then audit processes of the committee. And then the responsibilities like the chair, whoever he or she is of the committee, does he feel that something is not right? Those things. And as you all know, it's really hard. And then you're dealing often with very powerful people, maybe in powerful positions, and you're kind of coming and going, well, so you need the structures to support you. And more, again, the power and structure and governance within these institutions is crucially important. And I think going back to the one around ethics committees and what's happening in the UK, in terms of whether you go, if you're a doctoral student and you're working in a low-income country, say, the two committees, well, one university, as I said, has decided it's fine to go through the committee in that country and not through the UK. You could say, well, that's potentially dangerous. You're assuming things that may not be correct, and this is actually a good balancing process that's there, that's important.
There were a couple of questions. Dr. Anthony wants to ask some question, and Mr. Chanda.
Hello, Dr. Anthony.
My question is related to the previous question, maybe an add-on. How justiciable is the ethics committee decision or recommendation? Is it, is justiciable means what is the legally binding, how legally binding it is? If supposing one of the ethics committee member raises an objection, and the researcher and the institution wherein the researcher is affiliated go ahead with a not so satisfactory explanation, can you go to the court and get it and whether the media gets an access to it will become an issue? What's the implication? What's your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. And certainly when I was the chair of the London School Ethics Committee, this was something I wanted to try and experiment in the committee. We never got to that point. But on the whole, it's around the majority decision. So you move into this tension between, in a sense, the population and the individual. But you could argue that in ethics, that's not okay, that everybody should ultimately agree. And there's a process that's called dynamic governance or sociocracy, which you might like to have a look at, where organizations and companies work with, where everybody has to agree. And the concept in that is also that you can have what's called a paramount objection. So if you were working in an ethics committee, and you were in a situation where you really thought this was going to do a lot of harm, you would put in a paramount objection, and then the committee has to find a way through to resolving that. And the argument in that is also, it's the tension within that paramount objection where the juice is for creativity and finding different ways. And I've worked with this stuff, and it's very difficult, very painful. Things do come, but it takes a long time. And time is not, space and time is not something that...
You used the word paramount. What does that mean?
Paramount, in the word paramount there meaning that this is so important. Yeah. Whereas in other situations, maybe in answer to Dr. Anthony's question, maybe, okay, I don't really agree, but I can see what my colleagues are saying and I'll go with it. The paramount objection would be, I can see what you're saying, but you're missing something really important here. And maybe I don't quite know what it is, but something is not right. That would be your paramount objection. So you wouldn't allow it in a sense to go through, and then you'd have to find a different way. So yeah.
This becomes an issue in the vaccine approvals and vaccine and the emergency use authorization. It is a multi-million-dollar investment at stake when you take decisions.
I think Chandra. Yeah.
Dr. Chandra?
Chandra, you're muted, I think.
Yes.
We cannot hear you, Chandra.
They're not able to hear you.
I think he has to join
Some problem.
We don't see him.
Chandra, we can see him, but we are not able to hear. Yeah.
Is it?
Can you please type in, Chandra? You're muted.
Now he can unmute.
Unmute now. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Or if you can type in your question, that'll be fine.
It's mine.
I think it's not working.
The audio is not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Some problem with the audio.
Yeah.
Maybe you can put the question in the chat.
Yeah, I think he is typing in.
He's typing, I think. Yeah.
Just to add on to my previous remark or question, I think in India there was you showed those 4 ways, 4 means to knowledge in Ayurveda, and the last one is apta. Apta is something like a guru or verbal testimony, and that's in self-awareness state that the person is able to juggle with between the subjectivity and objectivity in an important way.
Yeah.
So there were philosophers of science in India like Dr. Ananda Wood, who put it as impersonal subjectivity. I don't think we have sufficient indicators for impersonal subjectivity, but apta is, I mean, we need to articulate these concepts better, I think. Yeah. Just
well, because certainly in the culture I come from, they're not present. And one way I could argue that is because we're not conscious of them, whereas you are here and in your history and culture. So those things, again, when we're crossing cultures, the things that we can learn from other cultures. But then as I started the talk, saying that, we are internationally, we're very much dominated in a sense here by Western philosophies and perspectives. And this is increasingly going to shift, certainly to Eastern philosophies, I'm sure, over the next period of time. And what's that going to be like? And so it's also, if you're sitting in so-called the power perspective, you need to be aware that you're doing that. And then also a lot of it's around listening. And when something comes at you, for example, like the guru, even the word guru itself is really huge, and it means whatever it means in your culture. It's not a word we really use in the UK. I use it because of my experience here. But there's a lot of really important information in there around the human condition. So, so that's also what that slide for me is really important, because it just opens up things into not knowing that I really don't know. And there are all these things here, and maybe I should know, and other people can give me that information. which I think in ethics is really important. Just accepting that, I don't know a lot of things. Most things I don't know.
We are sort of increasingly under the sort of constraint of fitting our ethics committee framework with the international framework. Like what you were saying,
Yes.
that where you come from, looking at your own experience of, your engagement with Ayurveda and so on, what are the major roadblocks you see, when we have to fit these two together? Because definitely we need to kind of look at our existing framework from, let's say, the principles of Ayurveda, Siddha, and other systems of medicine.
Yeah.
But I'm saying someone who's coming from, that sort of a framework where, you are constantly assessing research proposals based on, the particular framework that you laid out. And if you were to kind of look at, an Ayurveda study, what would be the kind of major blocks? Because we are all the time encountering these difficulties. Because, when you have research studies using a feminist research framework, where women's experiences and their voices, are privileged over the kind of the objective information that is gathered either through medical tests or through, other means, there is a big challenge over there, So I'm just wondering, supposing we were to kind of replace that kind of research with, say, Ayurveda research, where what Unni was referring to, there are these multiple factors play an important role. And so from your own experience, what do you see as kind of major blocks in, if you were to review, Ayurveda?
I think first one really in terms of who sits on these committees. So this, we talked about the individuals, but who are they? What are their perspectives? So it's around power in a sense of where at particular points in time we are. So I think that, so being more aware in a sense of that is really important. And I think in terms of things that Ayurveda, I'm a novice in the sense that to Ayurveda, but it's like, to me, one of the things that Ayurveda is, it's somehow, and it particularly relates to nature for me also in terms of it's really expanded my broader connection as a human being within all these other structures. So, whether it's plants, food, things that I kind of knew before as a medical doctor, and so, but in a very different way, in much more, I would say, looking for integration in a sense. These are part of me. So the underlying philosophy is so important. And I think, and the way I see things at the moment is that for me, the Ayurveda philosophy is very deep, from my perspective. So it holds within it my biomedical perspectives and so on. Whereas for me, my biomedical perspective does not hold Ayurveda within it. People would say, well, that's, you've learned that and that's your particular bias. Maybe, but that's kind of where I am at the moment. And I think relates also to this training I'm doing in the craniosacral therapy as well, which is I've gone back to the beginning of my medical school training and looking at my training through this different perspective, which is much more around what animates, and that to me is much more around what I've learned from Ayurveda as well. So it's sort of like, and then they sort of think, well, you know this, but I don't know whether. So, and an example would be working with physicians, my colleagues in a sense, whether they're neurologists or cardiacs, that we've been trained in a very particular way to see things, and it's disease oriented. So that is how we've been trained from often when we're very young. So I'm watching this friend of mine who's a neurologist now, who's in his late 60s, and watching him as he approaches later on in his life from the neurological, but he's very smart. And it's all through this particular result. So things happening to him, he's working on from the disease perspective. And that really upsets me. Because there's something, if once you've done that, there's another whole side that's missing. And I would say, in terms of as clinicians as well, we need to engage more with this thing of what creates wellness, and also kind of more of the mystery sense that goes on, which for me is much more there in the Ayurveda philosophy. So that's what I would say at the moment in terms of kind of where I am with that process. But it's this thing of there's something underneath all of these philosophies. So whether duty-based or work with Kant, there's something, yeah, but there's what's underneath that I think is really important to be reflecting.
Okay. I think if there is any other question, I think we'll wind up the session. So thank you for all joining for this interactive sessions. And first of all, thank you very much for John Porter for accepting our invitation and being a part of this and giving us very insights of ethics.
Well, great pleasure. I'm sorry I've kept you so long.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chandra
is not able to.
Hello, can you hear?
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yes,
Yeah, we can hear. We can.
Oh, then I'm glad. Can I ask my question? Is there a scope?
Yeah, please go ahead.
I can think about it. Yeah, good to connect with you, Dr. John, after many years.
Hello, nice to see you. Yeah.
This is the question about in 96 to 98. I was involved in the research project, a bilateral project between DFID and the Ministry of Social Justice, Government of India. I was directly, interviewing patients across India, thousands. It's an issue of beneficence and the informed consent. My respondent, based on the information you gave, Government of India will formulate policies and programs. A good report came out. It's a long story I'm talking about. Happened long ago.
So I missed the middle bit. What did he say?
What's the question, Chandra? We understand like a little bit about what your experience is.
The issue of beneficence. Can bilateral agencies do something about responsibility? What is the responsibility of funding and what?
Oh, right. So the responsibility of the funder?
The bilateral agencies involved in the research project, the local agency for the beneficence, you promise something and then ensure that it is done, the respondent.
Well, it's a bit like the PI, if we're all PIs on our investigation, it's also to me, if you're the funder, you have a responsibility to the processes as well. So to me, it's like a bit like I was saying in terms of the what's going on in the universities, working with just one ethics committee versus the other one. I think, so for example, if DFID was the funder in that situation, then to me, DFID has a responsibility for the process, but also then if working with government, as we know, that's very challenging. So, but nevertheless, for me, it doesn't take away the responsibility from the funding agency. And in terms of what we were talking about earlier on with the pharmaceutical industry, they have a responsibility for the ethics of their studies, not simply the randomized trial, but the whole context of the trial that they're working in. And they can't just depend on the ethics committee for telling them that they have to be conscious of that. That goes back to the institution, the governance structures, the awareness of the leaders within the institutions. And I know certainly in the West and the UK, our institutions are absolutely being battered at the moment. They're human institutions, the values have all gone. I've got a colleague who's fighting something both in social services, in the police and in the medical profession. It's really desperate. And this issue of getting back to values within institutions and the human aspects of that and the leaderships is just so crucial. So I think DFID would have a massive responsibility in that situation for what happens with the money that is working with.
Thank you.
Appreciate.
I would add this is very important with regard to liability and the damages. Unintended damages, it's very important. It should be crystal clear.
Yeah, agree. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you all.
Nice meeting.